Hi, everyone. It's Andrew with the Alliance for Innovation Infrastructure, and this month is Energy Month, which means we're talking with industry professionals about the energy resource relevant to their work. And today I'm joined by Patrick O'Neill to talk about nuclear energy. Hi, Patrick. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for being here with us. We're really excited to hear your perspective. To dive right in, tell us about what you do and what inspired your interest in nuclear energy.
I'm a graduate researcher at Texas A&M in the Department of Nuclear Engineering. My specialty is actually in nuclear nonproliferation, which is a subfield of nuclear that's basically focused on making sure that nuclear technology is available globally for peaceful purposes, but that it's not misused for weapons purposes or nefarious purposes. So I'm very passionate about nuclear energy. It's something that I think in this country and other countries is a very important energy resource. So that's something that kind of is always at the focus of what I do, even though it's maybe not directly being involved in nuclear power generation.
How would you define nuclear energy in your own words, and how does this energy resource set itself apart from others?
Nuclear energy really refers to extracting energy from the nucleus of atoms, so nucleus. Right now, the conventional way that we do that is through fission reactions. The nucleus of an atom will absorb a neutron and then it will split. And when it splits, it releases energy. A typical fission event will emit more neutrons, which then go on to start other fission events in nuclear reactors. Nuclear energy could refer to other interactions with the nucleus that can produce energy. Fusion would be a nuclear energy if it was something that was commercialized. So, and I hope it does get commercialized. I think it would be really, really neat. It's really just thinking about where that energy is coming from, and it's the nucleus of atoms. I think something that kind of makes it unique in compared to other energy sources, when it's used in commercial power, it's all of your fuel goes into the reactor, and then you don't add more fuel for a long time. It's kind of antithetical to how we think of, if we think about building a fire, you start with a little bit of fuel, and then you add more, and then you add more as your fire grows in size. But for nuclear, we put all of the fuel in the reactor, and then our fuel cycle lasts anywhere from a year and a half to 2 years, where we don't touch the fuel. We're just utilizing it to produce energy. So it's kind of a unique in that respect. It's a very, very sophisticated way to heat water, essentially, for most of the way that we commercialize it. There's some other niche, space applications where they're not heating water, they're producing heat and generating power in different ways, but for the most part, it's generating heat, making steam, running that steam through a turbine.
What are the challenges that come with building a nuclear power plant, and just the challenges with nuclear energy in general?
Nuclear is at a really interesting point right now where there's almost two nuclear industries. So unlike a lot of other industries where there's been constant innovation over the years, and it's, technology has evolved, and then there's just the current state of the art. Nuclear is very unique in that our existing nuclear power that we have in this country was predominantly built in the 1970s. A few exceptions haven't really built any commercial nuclear power in the United States since. And so building our next generation of nuclear is going to look a lot different than the nuclear that we did build in the past. So there's been a lot of advancements in the types of reactors that we can build, the materials that we can use, safety features. These reactors will be much more efficient and smaller and can reach higher temperatures. But it means that there's kind of two sets of challenges, right? So if we wanted to build more nuclear like the nuclear we have, the big challenge is it's very, very costly. These are huge facilities. They're going to take over 10 years to build. It's a big capital investment, and it's a rigorous regulatory process. That's kind of one set of challenges. If we wanted to build nuclear like we've always had, if we wanted to build this advanced nuclear, there's still those regulatory hurdles, but now it's even more magnified because the regulatory process is designed to regulate the previous generation of nuclear that looks very different than what maybe we want to build in the future. Future nuclear is trying to be things that we can build faster and things that maybe don't require as much upfront capital costs. So there's kind of trade-offs there. It's a worthy investment. These plants that we built in the 1970s, many of them are still operating, and they're going to operate for another 20 years. It's kind of a long-term game, which is hard to pitch investors on that sometimes. It's very steady. It'll be around for a long time, but it's hard to get, to the point where it's built and operating.
Yeah, 10 years is quite a long time. At least,
And that's optimistic.
If we're looking at this from a very surface level point of view, how can we discern conventional nuclear from advanced nuclear?
I would say conventional nuclear, what we have would be large power reactors, typically anywhere from typically around 1 gigawatt capacity, and they are water cooled and they use a solid uranium oxide fuel. Advanced nuclear is maybe, there's a lot of different categories, but some are looking at using a different coolant than water. Some are looking at a different fuel configuration than the typical uranium oxide fuel. And some are looking to be very similar in style to conventional nuclear, but just smaller. So those would be called like small modular reactors. There's a lot of industry around designing small modular reactors because it kind of benefits from being similar enough to the nuclear that we do have, but it kind of circumvents that capital cost and time to build, because instead of building 2 large power reactors that are 800 megawatts each to produce, 1.6 gigawatts, you could maybe produce 8 200 megawatt small modular reactors, and you could build them 2 at a time. So you start generating power while you're still building the next set and start seeing a return on your investment before the long time period it would take to build 2 conventional nuclear reactors at one power site.
Moving off of what you just said, safety. When it comes to safety, what does that look like in terms of the creation and just, I guess, nuclear in principle?
One of the things I really love about the nuclear industry is how safety focused it is. I think if you ask any nuclear engineer working at a power generation facility, safety is the number one part of their job description, no matter who they are. It's taken very, very seriously there. And you see that in the way that we design our nuclear power facilities. There's a lot of redundancy in our safety components, because that redundancy protects us. If something fails, we have a backup. And if the backup fails, there's another backup. The measures they take to make sure that their most important components are resilient, and then even beyond that, redundant. That's something that in nuclear engineering is a huge point of emphasis, is how do you at all times ensure the safe operation and the safe shutdown, if need be, of nuclear energy facilities. So I think if you took an engineer from a different industry and you showed them all of the regulations around nuclear power, they would say, wow, this is such an overregulated industry. That's crazy that you have to go to this length and that length.
I think also if you took engineers from other fields and you showed them the amount of space that the average nuclear power plant requires, which is about around 830 acres, given its capacity factor and energy output, it's the smallest land use footprint of any carbon-free energy source.
Yeah, it's a huge strength of nuclear, and we're trying to get even smaller, which is pretty amazing to think about.
What would you like the public to know about nuclear energy?
How much time do you have? Because there's a lot of misconceptions about nuclear out there. I think my number one is just, I would love the public to understand how important nuclear will be in terms of decarbonizing our energy grid to the maximum extent. It's baseload generation, which is not something that a lot of renewables can claim. It's baseload generation that can be anywhere. The other carbon-free baseload generators are hydroelectric and geothermal, which you need specific conditions to make that happen. Whereas nuclear can be anywhere, and it's carbon-free, and it will be the backbone of your grid. So that's like the number one thing I would love the public to just think about. Nuclear is green, and it needs to be a part of our green future. The number one misconception that I would love to clear up is about nuclear waste. A lot of people in the public think that nuclear waste is like a big problem that we haven't solved. To me, as a nuclear engineer, nuclear waste and used nuclear fuel is not a technical issue. It's a policy issue, actually. We have many strategies that we can use to manage the nuclear fuel that we've used in power generation, but we just need to commit to a policy solution to kind of get the ball rolling. As far as it needs money, right? And so whether that strategy is geological repositories, which is burying fuel deep in geological formations that basically won't leach anything out into the world, whether that's reprocessing, which is taking used nuclear fuel and actually extracting materials from it that are still usable in nuclear energy, and just basically isolating the radioactive waste that we can't use into a much, much smaller, form if we can extract that from a large volume. Both of those are viable ways to basically mitigate nuclear waste as much as we can, and we know how to do them. It's just a matter of committing the resources to do that. I would also say what we are doing right now with nuclear waste is sustainable for a very long time. So right now, when nuclear fuel is used in a reactor, when it is no longer efficient to use in the reactor, it's taken out, and it still generates a lot of heat and radiation, and so it's kept in a spent fuel pool or a used fuel pool at a nuclear reactor facility where it cools off for about 10 years, and then it's placed into these very, very large concrete casks that are extremely resilient, and they're kept at nuclear reactor facilities on site. I have not heard of a nuclear power facility that is running out of room in their spent fuel facilities. They've got plenty of room in their pools, and they've got plenty of room, in whatever area they're keeping all of their spent fuel casks. So yeah, it's definitely, it would be nice to have a policy solution to nuclear waste, but nuclear waste, as we are currently experiencing with the level of nuclear power fleet that we have, it's not something that, a plant is going to run into not having room for the used nuclear fuel that it has. And I think that goes back to kind of how we in the industry have over-engineered everything. It's like, designed these facilities that contain used nuclear fuel to be, twice as big as we need them to be, right?
My first takeaway is just you essentially want the public to start moving it into the category of green.
Yeah, I think something that has been seen in certain energy markets in this country is nuclear energy doesn't benefit from some of the same subsidies that other green energy sources do, is just as important to that mission, right?
I think the public is so focused on buzzwords and, saving the environment to where they forget the reality that no matter what we do, waste will be accumulated. Whether you're creating solar panels, whether you're creating, a wind turbine, there's so much that goes into this. Even people who drive electric cars who don't understand the energy mix and whether or not coal is powering, what is charging their batteries.
No energy generation is truly carbon free. Nuclear is, the amount of carbon that it does generate in the construction of nuclear power plants is definitely vastly mitigated by how long those plants can run and generate power emission free. So it's,
well, everything you're talking about as well when it comes to policy moves into my final question. What would you like policymakers and decision makers to know?
One of the big things I would love policymakers and decision makers to think about is an investment, a reinvestment in our regulatory framework. We stopped building nuclear power plants in this country for a long time. Between the 1980s and the mid 2000s, there was very little going on on the front of building nuclear energy facilities in this country. And so I think that has led to some atrophy in our regulatory framework. And our regulatory framework is really only designed to approve a certain type of nuclear power. And we're moving into, a future where we want a lot of types of nuclear power. And so I think there needs to be some investment into the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, to do the appropriate safety analyses, do the appropriate engineering analyses to create or modify the existing frameworks that we have to accommodate advanced nuclear. Because these are such amazing ideas that can be really powerful tools, and it's hard to get excited about these companies when it's like, well, will it be approved by the NRC? And it's, will the NRC even really give it a fair shake with just the way that it kind of thinks about nuclear power right now? So I think there needs to be an investment in that, in bringing some really, some great engineers into the NRC to kind of revamp that framework so that we are doing the appropriate safety analyses. We're making sure that these plants are as safe as possible before we approve them, but we're not putting too much of that burden on the people who want to make advanced nuclear. We're making sure that the system is not the hindrance
Mhm.
to why these get built, right? It's totally feasible economically, it's feasible scientifically, it's feasible from the materials perspective, but we just can't get it approved. That would be, I mean, that would be tragic. How do we best uh, improve that process? So,
Yeah, like what's the most viable solution? And
yeah, and it's
a nonpartisan issue, be solution oriented.
yeah, it's well, and it's I do have some faith because going back to thinking about the traditional nuclear, many of those plants that we built in the 70s really only had 40-year licenses. And there had to be a lot of engineering work to basically extend those licenses to make sure that, hey, these components that we only rated for 40 years, could they go 20 more? Do they need to be replaced? What kind of preventative maintenance needs to be done to keep these older plants as part of our grid? I mean, about 20% of the grid in this country is nuclear, and that's a huge. When every time you lose a facility, it's a big chunk of energy that we're losing. So yeah, I think the NRC has shown that it can adapt a little bit. It just needs more investment to adapt even more. So
This entire month's been dedicated to educating the public and raising their energy IQ. I've asked so many people what they think about when it comes to power generation in America, and nobody thinks about it because not enough people have a sense of urgency when it comes to energy infrastructure in general, unless something goes wrong. And I
yeah,
think that at least the people who think they're very cognizant of, moving in a direction that doesn't regress us, I find that nuclear it stands out.
yeah. It's I mean, it's an exciting time to be a nuclear engineer, and I really
A
really am
terrifying time to
very
be anyone
hopeful.
else.
No. It'll be great. It'll be great. Energy will be cheaper and better, and less carbon will be emitted. Yeah.
Yeah, and also for us to be, fully energy independent.
Every watt that we can generate with nuclear is we don't have to be buying fossil fuels, or the fossil fuels that we extract, we can be exporting. So I mean, there's definitely a huge benefit to nuclear for energy independence. It has something we didn't really touch on. It has a crazy high capacity factor in comparison to every other source of energy generation. It's online. I mean, over 90% of the time. So I mean, it's a great tool from that perspective, and yeah, it can definitely be a big part of our energy independence and energy resilience. Nuclear, I think people don't realize how resilient it is to certain weather conditions. I live in Texas, and we had a pretty serious winter storm a few years ago, and nuclear was, most of our state's nuclear was on the grid, and in a time when the grid was really, really unstable. So I mean, I think to me that was just a further impetus of like, we could add so much, not only just great clean energy to the grid, but a lot of energy stability to our grid by building more nuclear because of how resilient it is and the high capacity factor. So
Well, that's a really good note to end on.
yeah, thanks for having me. And as nuclear engineers, we need to be a little bit better about interacting with the public and
Yep.
explaining why we love nuclear energy and nuclear power, and why you should too. So hopefully I did an okay job at that.
No, you did an amazing job. And I find that, yeah, it is so important to have that communication open with the public and really be sharing. That's why I'm doing this, talking with industry professionals, talking with people who it's their every single day. Even when I was in the military, I started using all of this jargon, in civilian life, and people are like, I have no clue what you're talking about. And I'm like, how do you not know what this means?
It's true. I mean, even, in graduate school, you get, I have my kind of sub niche of nuclear engineering, and I talk to other nuclear engineers, and they have a whole different set of jargon than mine, so it's even, it is sometimes inescapable. And I think it's always a good exercise to try and break out of that a little bit.
But thank you so much, Patrick, for being with us here today. It was amazing to hear your perspective. To learn more about AII Energy Month, visit aii.org/Energy Month. Thank you, guys.